Hi, it's the Dutch carnivore here. Dutch for 40 years and carnivore for 1.5 years. I just came back from my weekly trip to the butcher and amongst other things I bought this piece of beef brisket. And today I'm going to show you how I turn this into brisket burgers. Going for beef brisket to make your own ground meat is a very good idea. First of all, because it's a very cheap cut of meat. So in my case, I paid €8 for this piece that weighs over 2 pounds. In the US, that would come down to about $4 per pound. And cooking beef brisket normally takes quite some time because it's a relatively tough muscle meat. It's a muscle that comes from the breast of the cow, so it has been working a lot. And so if you just pass it through the meat grinder, that saves you a lot of time. And then also the composition of the meat is very suitable for making your own burger patties or your meatballs. It has as you can see here, a nice fat layer. There's a lot of connective tissue, so that's very good for making meatballs as well. And then there's a very slight marbling of the rest of the tissue. But overall, I really like also the taste of this muscle meat. Then, well, as I told you, we are going to grind the meat ourselves. I really like to do it that way because I can buy my own meat. I know that the meat comes from one cow. I know where the cow is coming from. And unlike supermarket meat, I can be sure that it comes in fact from one cow and not 10 or 100. So there will be one cow passing through the meat grinder instead of a lot of cows in a large processing facility. So in terms of hygiene and food safety, I think that's a much better choice. And then finally, I am not going to put any additives in the meat. I will just have pure ground meat and add a little bit of salt and then I start cooking. Well, the process is going to be very easy. I am going to cut this piece of meat in pieces. It doesn't really matter how big those pieces are as long as they easily pass through the meat grinder. Then I place the meat on top of the meat grinder and one by one I will drop the pieces into the tube. And then we get our ground meat. That will take about 1 or 2 minutes. Then I will slightly season the meat and we are ready to go. Probably I will store it for a few hours in the fridge until it's evening time. But you of course have to wait only a few seconds. Well, before we start cutting the meat, let's have a quick look at all the components of the meat grinder and set up the meat grinder as well. That way I limit the number of times that I have to wash my hands. Well, the meat grinder works quite simply. There is a tube through which the meat passes, and in this tube there is this spiral shaft. We have to insert it. Then at the end of the spiral shaft we put the lammet, and then, well, there has to be a mesh on top, and we can use several of these. And today I will be using the fine mesh because that gives the best results for meatballs. Things like this very coarse mesh, I would use it, for example, for filling sausages. And this one over here, well, it can be useful for beef tartare, for example. But this fine one is much better for ground meat, so your meatballs won't fall apart that easily. Then we close it off. And we are going to insert it in the machine. And then put this platter on top. And then we are ready to go, so let's cut the meat. Well, there we go. It's going to be a bit noisy. There's one thing missing. I need the plunger as well. It's over here. If the meat gets stuck, which doesn't happen that often actually, then we can use the plunger to give it a push. But usually the meat you can just let it drop into the tube and the tube will pull the meat itself. So let's go. Well, let's have a look at the result. Quite a nice ground meat it seems, and also quite sticky. So when you push it together, you already see that it's very easy to form meatballs. And I like it very much with all this fat. We're going to place it in the fridge for a moment, because for me it's not mealtime yet. Then in several hours we will get back. Well, we're back. Let's season the meat and we're going to form it into meatballs. Well, that's the usual stuff, and then we are going to bake. Just salt, nothing more. But of course I'm going to use a lot. Okay, let's go. This meat is really very easy to form into meatballs. I don't pay too much attention to the size. Well, let's first grab all the meat together. This is another bowl. This is another one. So usually I make 4 meatballs out of 1 pound, so these will become 8 of them probably. And after forming the meatballs, I flattened them out to form burger patties. And you can see the result here. They become very nice and shiny meatballs. It's because of the fat content. And these are ready to bake. So let's start baking.